King Jon and Queen Daenerys woke in their chambers. The Stark siblings had returned from their Winterfell flight the evening prior. Daenerys sat up, breathing heavily after murmuring her dragon's name in her sleep. Jon had decided not to wake her, allowing her to avoid the awkward conversation about her guilt regarding his injury. She stared in silence while sitting on the bed's edge. He gently placed his palm on her shoulder as she met his embrace with her own hand.
It's all my doing.
She claimed emotionlessly. Drogon, asked Jon, and her eyes welled as she spoke.
If I hadn't scorned someone who cared for me, it wouldn't have happened. It's fitting, I must admit.
How so?
My first husband was struck in his shoulder, and the infection took him, indirectly. Now the child I named for him is dying from a shoulder injury. Again, all due to my own ignorance.
There was no way of knowing for sure. Cersei contacted all the sellswords of Essos.
Queen Daenerys forced a smile towards her husband. She knew there was little he could say, though she looked as if she appreciated his efforts.
I sent the second sons and the Red Woman to King's Landing.
Jon admitted, and this seemed to surprise Daenerys.
An olive branch.
Partially.
King's Landing makes sense. I can't blame Ser Jorah for wanting some distance between the sellswords and himself.
Not to change the subject, but could Drogon fly a short distance?
I suppose he could. He loses a lot of blood when he flies. The wound won't congeal.
It wouldn't be far.
Admitted Jon, and Daenerys expected a more thorough explanation.
We need to speak to the children of the forest, and Bran thinks they may be at the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye.
Are there weirwood trees on the isle?
Legends say yes. Why do you ask?
My dreams many times. I'd see weirwoods, surrounded by water and bodies.
Responded a shaken Daenerys. Jon was speechless when he saw fright in her eyes for the first time.
This is necessary, and Drogon will have to assist.
Perhaps sailing would be more prudent.
Drogon's fire had set Yara's ship aflame when he attempted to fight off the dead upon our arrival. The ship was saved, but is now without sails. Lady Yara assures me they are spinning flax, but won't be seaworthy for days.
It'll be dragons then. Gendry's steel will be completed soon. Then we fly to the Isle.
Who would accompany us?
Whoever can still swing a sword.
Jon finished as he stared out of their window. Nearly 3 days now, and a sparse army of the dead continued marching southeast past their ruined castle. Lord Gendry took a break from working over his anvil. He approached a workbench and started affixing his Valyrian steel arrowheads, while Lady Arya admired his work. She practiced shooting arrows and glancing over her shoulder at him. She drew another arrow and took aim as the distraction of the Lord of Storm's End she could no longer stomach.
Stop staring. I know what I look like.
She embarrassingly admitted while lining up her shot.
I think you're beautiful.
Responded Lord Gendry. Lady Arya's arrow sailed high and missed her target completely. Frustrated, she turned to him while retrieving another arrow from her quiver.
In spite of...
Before, after, still. How many words you want a smith to use?
Lord Gendry interrupted, almost perturbed. Arya was speechless at his response, but acted nonchalant. Darkness had enveloped them as night fell upon Harrenhal. The torchlight flickered, and Lady Arya admired a brief view of the stars.
I haven't seen them in months.
She said to herself, but loud enough for Lord Gendry to hear.
That's it then.
Spoke Lord Gendry aloud, referring to his work.
How much?
Inquired Arya as she snapped out of her trance.
70 arrowheads, a dozen daggers, 2 long swords and a head for my hammer.
Well done, my lord.
Responded King Jon, coming around the corner and fully entering the room.
We fly at first light.
Informed King Jon to the pair of them. We? Asked Lord Gendry.
To the Isle of Faces. We need to find the children of the forest. Are you ready for a fight?
As much as ever, your grace. But are we anticipating one?
Lord Gendry admitted with a wide smile he was powerless to conceal.
We'll see what your steel is worth.
challenged John, and Lord Gendry seemed confident in his craft.
You as well.
Informed John to Lady Arya's surprise.
Are you ready?
He inquired, and Arya leapt into John's arms without warning, similar to how she had done when they were children.
You thought I'd be more protective, I figured.
Sort of.
Lady Arya admitted as her feet returned to the floor. She then attempted to recover her propriety.
You're the best protection I could hope for,
responded John as his eyes shifted down to Ghost and Nymeria.
The bloody wolf hardly leaves my side.
He's taken to you a bit.
John laughed as he returned his eyes back to his sister.
Glad to see Nymeria has finally returned to you.
We've still lost more than we've gained.
She answered him ironically with his own words.
Rest up tonight.
John commanded before exiting the forges. Lord Gendry was now in a dimly lit room on the ground level. He was relieved his work was complete. However, these new weapons' stamina would be the issue that would keep him awake this night. A knock at the door jerked him back to his senses. Lady Arya was at the door with what looked like linens.
West Berthing's second floor. Meet me there in an hour.
Lady Arya demanded. She promptly left before he could answer. The hour passed quickly, and Gendry followed her direction. He reached the second floor. He knew from his time held captive here. He immediately recognized this as the officers' quarters. Lady Arya knelt over a washbin, adding more hot water to it and checking its temperature. Gendry cleared his throat to announce his arrival. Lady Arya noticed him and stood to her bare feet. Gendry noticed she had shed her normal leather and wool gambeson. She stood before him in a sleek silk gown, her hair down over her shoulders. She slowly approached him to within a step.
You've been Lord Baratheon for weeks now. I doubt you've had a bath since then.
A bit longer than that, I must admit.
Lord Gendry revealed. Arya took the final step and looked up at him. Gendry slowly tucked her hair behind her ear, as she was using it to hide her scars. Lord Gendry did this without words. He wanted her to know it didn't bother him. She grabbed the hem of his shirt and lifted it over his head and began fumbling with his belt. Gendry placed his hands on hers and simply asked,
"What are you doing?"
Giving my lord a bath.
responded Arya innocently. And Lord Gendry smiled and ironically said,
You still can't call me that.
Gendry walked over to the bin and removed his unbuckled pants. He helped himself into the tub and Arya came up behind him. He rested his head and closed his eyes. Lady Arya wrapped her arms around his neck and gently scrubbed his chest. She rested her face at the base of his neck and just enjoyed being close to him. Lord Gendry reached back behind him to embrace her back. He realized her silk gown wasn't there. Once Arya saw that he knew, she stood and walked around the tub. Gendry saw so many scars he couldn't count, slashes and stab wounds. He leaned forward and kissed her stomach. He wanted her to know these scars did not bother him. She slowly stuck a foot in the tub, and then the other. She sat down atop of Gendry, as he made no objection. She kissed him. For how long she did not know. Arya mentioned something about leeches, and the two laughed until sunrise. The next morning, soldiers were gathering in the courtyard just inside the Harrenhal southern gate. Lord Gendry was assisted by Sir Beric bringing the Valyrian steel to the courtyard. He had a half-dozen quivers full of shiny new arrows for the Ironborn, and Osman received them gleefully.
Fuck yes, bloody legend.
He complimented Lord Gendry on his craftsmanship. The blacksmith then handed out daggers to Lady Brienne, Sir Beric, Jon, Ser Jorah, and a few of the Ironborn. Lord Gendry then approached Queen Daenerys and presented her a Valyrian steel dagger.
We've yet to deliver you to your throne, my queen. Please accept this small piece of it for the time being.
I will accept this token as a symbol of the continued alliance between houses Targaryen and Baratheon.
Lord Gendry then presented Heartsbane to Sir Beric. After a close inspection, Sir Beric cut his exposed palm and lit the sword aflame. The old knight grinned wide in appreciation.
That's all, Your Grace.
Lord Gendry reported to King Jon.
Got yourself a new hammer.
Jon noticed and Gendry lifted it so Jon could get a better look. The upper half of the stem was steel. The head was a bit smaller. but came to a point on both ends. Jon was impressed, as Gendry assumed he would be. Jon couldn't help but notice Lord Gendry was in a bit of a better mood today. King Jon was next to brief the group's movements.
Bran, Samwell, and Sansa will remain here in Harrenhal with the Northmen. The Dothraki will ride south under the cover of the dragons in case Drogon cannot make the trip.
Jon finished before Queen Daenerys then spoke up to clarify.
Drogon will need a running start because of his injury. Jon will lift off on Rhaegal, along with Arya, Gendry, and Ser Beric. With the army of the dead still marching southeast, Rhaegal will lay down 2 lines of fire. The Dothraki and Ironborn will clear out the dead in between the channels of fire. Ser Jorah, Ser Jaime, and Lady Brienne will accompany me on Drogon.
Queen Daenerys finished and Jon took the briefing from here.
Once we reach the shore, the Dothraki will then ride south on the west side of the river to join up with the Second Sons, outside of King's Landing.
Lord Tyrion, Ser Davos, and the rest of the Unsullied have been sailing from Dragonstone to Blackwater Bay, and will be awaiting our arrival.
Queen Daenerys finished. The south gate was then opened and the Dothraki charged out into the fray. Barely 300 riders were flanked by fire as they charged at the dead caught in between the channels. Queen Daenerys was atop Drogon as he squeezed through the massive gate. Daenerys felt for her child. She felt him shudder with every step and groan with every flap of his wing as they lifted into the air. After nearly 20 steps, he was able to lift off. Queen Daenerys watched as his bleeding worsened. Droplets fell from the sky like rain, she thought to herself. They were over the Greyjoy ship and finally out to the open water. Mere minutes passed and the Isle came into view. Rhaegal circled around and followed Drogon at a safe distance. Queen Daenerys could tell Drogon's flight was abnormal. His left wing rarely moved. His ascension peaked and he was beginning to lose altitude. They were closing in on land as Daenerys started to doubt whether they could safely make it. Drogon painfully spread his wings to glide to the beach. On his second attempt, his wings struck the shallow lake floor. His snout hit the water and dug into the lake bed. He ejected his riders and flipped his body onto the beach. Queen Daenerys lay a few yards away from her dragon. Ser Jorah and Lady Brienne were helping Ser Jaime ashore as they had jumped before Drogon's crash. Daenerys pushed herself onto her knees. Once she saw her passengers were alive, her attention turned to her child. Daenerys regained her feet and stumbled towards him. Drogon lay in a pool of his own blood, breathing heavily. She tried to find the source of the blood. The scorpion wound could not have spilled this much, Daenerys thought. She circled him, taking in his form, and then she saw it. His wings' impact with the ground at that speed had broken the bones like a snapped twig. Through the scarlet scales and the crimson blood protruded the bright white bone. It was as white as the snow on the ground, and Daenerys sobbed as she collapsed. Jon stood behind her and lifted her to her feet. Drogon's breathing had become shallow. He attempted to shift his weight and let out a weak wail.
He's in pain. There's no coming back from this. I'm so sorry, Dany,
said Jon mournfully. Daenerys hadn't made a sound since she reached her feet. Jon turned her towards him. Her face was blank. Dany stood completely void of all emotion. Daenerys knew she was in shock, but could do nothing to remedy it.
What can we do?
Inquired Daenerys in apparent need of advisement. Jon reluctantly voiced the only solution he could think of.
Only one thing, I think.
Jon responded as he slowly unsheathed Blackfire. Daenerys was startled by the sound of it, and she stopped him from advancing.
No, I should. If you happen to fail, he'll kill you.
Jon reluctantly handed her his long sword. Showing strength Jon could not imagine, she climbed on his back. She placed the tip of Blackfire at the base of his skull as she whispered in her native High Valyrian. Jon thought it sounded like a prayer. When the Mother of Dragons finished whispering, she hesitated. Her deepest breath she could no longer hold and exhaled. The next sound she expected to hear was a roar of her child or her own wail. But what she heard confused her. She simply heard her husband say softly,
Danny, he's gone.
Her eyes met Jon, and they were filled with a sorrow that Jon had never before witnessed. Daenerys quietly climbed down off her dragon. She handed Jon his sword without a word. She stared off over the water, as the dead could still be seen at a distance marching towards King's Landing. Queen Daenerys seemed fixated on them. Jon refused to interrupt her. Daenerys began walking down the shoreline, and Jon thought it best to let her be. Even her trot seemed emotionless. Jon couldn't help but think of the dead as he watched her pace away from them. Ser Jorah looked to Jon to see if he was going to stop her or at least escort her.
Khaleesi.
Called Ser Jorah to her. She then turned to her longtime friend.
I'd rather be alone now, blood of my blood.
She continued down the beach and watched Rhaegal circling the island. As Daenerys silently mourned another child, she suddenly felt guilty over her own selfishness. As she had once thought she was the last Targaryen, Rhaegal now knew he was the last dragon. Her mind raced from thought to thought. Eventually, she always ended at the same place. Cersei. Somewhere out there were two murderous people who had taken her children from her. This was going to go beyond justice. This was revenge.
There will be blood, and there will be fire.
Sir Beric had started a fire on the shoreline as Jon, Ser Jorah, and Ser Jaime went to seek shelter for the night. Darkness was nearly upon them as Jon then sought out Arya.
Can you follow Daenerys without her knowing?
Better than anyone you know.
Lady Arya confidently admitted to her brother.
Just make sure she finds her way back to us, in her own time.
Jon added as Arya agreed and sped off into the darkness. Jon and Sir Beric proceeded on their own, as did Ser Jorah and Ser Jaime. Minutes passed as they ventured deeper into the Isle. The snow fell heavier as they reached a large clearing. Jon continued towards the center of the clearing. In front of him stood a large weirwood, the largest he had ever seen. It was eerily familiar to the godswood, Jon thought to himself. He slowly approached the massive tree in the darkness. There was something calming about its appeal, the white bark and the red leaves contrasting against the pale background. He closed his eyes and spoke silently to his father, or his uncle. It didn't matter to him. Jon sensed a sudden light through his eyelids. He slowly opened them to locate its source. In complete silence, multiple torches were lit all around Jon. Near each of these torches stood one of the children of the forest.
Welcome, stranger. We are no threat to you.
Added another while eyeing Jon's grip on his hilt. As Jon slowly turned, he saw at least 10 of them, short in stature, though that was the only attribute they had in common with human children.
We have been expecting you,
revealed the child facing Jon. He stuttered slightly before clearing his throat and softening his gaze before responding.
I am. We are searching. We are in need of answers.
Come, stranger. We have much to discuss,
responded the first child before turning her back on him.
My name is Jon.
Yes, we know,
she responded curtly. This perplexed Jon as his thoughts struggled to keep up with his eyes.
What should I call you?
I've been called Kale for a millennia,
she answered as the rest of Jon's party had reached the clearing. Each of them approached slowly in order to not be perceived as a threat. Ser Jorah, Ser Jaime and Lady Brienne surrounded the weirwood. Lord Gendry and Sir Beric were the last to arrive a few minutes later.
One is missing.
2 actually, and they're not missing.
Jon corrected her assumption. Arya dropped out of the weirwood tree with catspaw shimmering behind her back.
We're fine, Arya. There's no threat here.
Daenerys rode off on Rhaegal. He initially resisted her, but eventually succumbed.
Lady Arya finished as she sheathed her dagger, her eyes continuously shifting from man to child and back again.
How did you know how many of us were here?
There are always 7.
Kael answered with a small amount of surprise at the number of questions she was receiving. Her attention was then drawn to the other first man in their group.
So, this has happened before.
Many times, my warrior.
My name is Jorah Mormont.
He corrected, curious as to why Kael was refusing to use any of their birth names.
What exactly has happened here before?
Asked a perturbed Jon. Kael then approached him and looked him squarely in the eyes, almost insulted by the question.
The judgment of mankind.
Responded Kael, and Jon's shoulders slumped in response.
Get on with it then.
We are not here to judge. Our fate is tied to yours. We are allies in this fight, have been so since the Pact.
The alliance between the first men and the children.
The very same. The legends in this regard remain accurate. Others, not so much.
The first men and the children made a peace treaty, here, at this location, thousands of years ago. History aside, we need to know how to kill your creation, the Night King.
The Night King is one of many enemies. He can be killed with the sword on your hip, but defeating him will prove to be much more difficult.
And what will that require?
Sacrifice.
She simply retorted while looking upward at the great weirwood.
This judgment you mentioned, it has happened before.
Asked Sir Jaime, seemingly frustrated at the answers to their inquiries. Jon attempted no correction as he agreed with Sir Jaime's feelings in this manner.
Yes, the first taking place north of the wall. The first men called them the last hero. 12 warriors set out to defeat the Night King for good. The 7 survivors were designated to represent all mankind.
Kael paused. She noticed she now had a captive audience.
Every few thousand years, or so, the dead would rise, and so would men to face them. We are long overdue.
Kael finished as she circled the weirwood. She appeared to have given this speech before, Jon thought to himself.
So what does he want?
Asked Lady Brienne impatiently. Kael seemed to have expected these inquiries.
He desires what most men desire. I expect protection for his people, revenge, and a good death.
Kael finished to her audience.
But being killed and being defeated are separate entities.
Asked Arya as the others seemed to agree with her.
It's difficult to explain. First, you have to win.
Why us then?
Asked Lord Gendry as the others shifted their attention back to Kael.
For that, we go to the beginning. The 7, the Drowned God, Lord of Light, and the Many-Faced God. There are only 2. Life and death, locked in eternal struggle against each other, and death is winning. After the last hero triumphed, word spread across Westeros and Essos of what these 7 accomplished. In Essos, they worshipped these warriors, and after many thousands of years, adopted the faith of the 7, which the Andals then brought back to Westeros. These 7 are not gods. They are men, chosen men. The Night King had a choice. He chose to represent death, so this is where we find ourselves.
Kael finished and assumed to be feathered with more questions.
What of life?
Asked Lady Brienne emphatically, to which Kael had a prepared response.
Fire, life, and light. They are all the same. Recently, they have been referred to as the Lord of Light. Each of you was chosen to represent one of the 7. The Lord saw something in each of you, protected you, and in some cases, brought you back from the other side, after death had claimed you.
She finished while looking at Sir Beric and King Jon.
You say death is winning.
Over 3/4 of the Westerosian population has died. In a few short years, ask yourself, how many of your children have been born in that time?
Does the imbalance affect the ability for children to be born?
Somewhat. The struggle shifts over the years. Some say all beings were made by the gods. Knowing how vicious and power-hungry men are, would you expect the gods to be any different?
Kale finished. She seemed to have made her point and not one spoke up to disagree with her.
Would defeating the Night King defeat death itself?
Asked Lady Arya, and Kale was intrigued by the question. She slowly approached her, seemingly studying her face before responding.
Lady Stark, you of all people should know that death has many faces. His is merely one of many.
Kale finished as Rhaegal had screeched overhead and attracted their attention momentarily. Jon could not make out his dragon's form in the dark of night. Frustrated, he then turned to Kale.
And when will this judgment be passed upon us?
There can be no judgment until after the trial.
Kale answered, seemingly adhering to the laws of both gods and men. Suddenly it all made sense to Jon as the others scoffed at the idea.
Can we call our own witnesses then?
Arya jested sarcastically, and Jon retorted before Kale could defend her ominous statement.
It won't be that kind of trial,
responded Jon, to the general interest of the rest of the participants present.
Then what will it be, Your Grace?
a trial by combat.
So who are we to you exactly?
You, Jaime Lannister, are the father.
Horse shit.
Sir Jaime shouted. The mere presumption of that word was enough to clearly frustrate him. Sir Jaime stepped close to her and lowered himself to her level.
I was a father for mere minutes before those vicious cunts you call gods took her away from me.
Responded Sir Jaime softly but furiously. He calmly enunciated every word with a certain malice.
What does a father do? He mentors, he teaches, he sacrifices, does he not? You sacrificed everything you held dear. Your name, your honor, and your reputation. And what became of that sacrifice? King's Landing was spared, possibly even the realm itself. You passed righteous judgment on a madman, and dealt justice accordingly. As the lone father figure for a little brother whose own father rejected him.
Cale finished, and at these words Sir Jaime's face contorted from righteous rage to silent weeping.
And for that, I name you the father.
Sir Jaime silently accepted the honor. The remaining men and women presided in a circle around the great weirwood. They stood at roughly the same interval. Cale was the only one inside the circle. The remaining children stayed close to their torches. Cale then approached Lady Brienne as she had half expected her to.
I've seen a god's work before. I've seen a shadow murder an unarmed man, a just man.
Lady Brienne spat, and Cale took in her comment with a sigh. She seemed to have expected it.
A just man does not attack his brother. Have you asked yourself how many lives were saved by preventing a Baratheon civil war? Death preserved life on that particular day.
Cale finished as Lady Brienne took a knee, just as Sir Jaime had done, but for different reasons.
Brienne of Tarth, protector of the innocent, merciful and just.
Cale announced as she slowly approached Lady Brienne. She then raised her head and spoke aloud.
I am not a mother.
Lady Brienne stated with a certain emotionless curiosity.
Mothers protect those under her charge, and would lay down their life to protect others. Who else here could I be describing?
Cale inquired, and Lady Brienne simply nodded and accepted the compliment.
Brienne of Tarth, I name thee the mother. Many of you were easy choices. One of you was not. The Lord had concerns regarding you.
Cale looked at Arya's direction. She stood tall, her curiosity outweighing her concern.
So, for the first time in thousands of years, the Lord of Light took a human form to speak with you, Arya Stark. Many years ago, the Lord knew you would eventually serve the god of death, though he never lost faith in your return. You came across a dying man, who spoke of the land he hardly recognized. He lamented the lack of balance in the kingdoms.
Cale reminded her. Arya's eyes widened as she remembered that particular interaction. She gave him water before the hound had ended his suffering. She told him nothing isn't worse than anything. Nothing is just nothing.
And that's what becomes of life if death overtakes it. this world becomes nothing.
Kyle finished as if she was reading Arya's mind.
You represent love, for family, for strangers, for self. You also represent beauty. Arya Stark, I name thee the Maiden.
Kale finished as Arya silently nodded her head. She then moved on to the next.
Beric Dondarrion, ever faithful servant of the Lord, eyes ever gazing to the flames. The Lord bestowed upon you the gift of foresight.
Kale paused and Sir Beric simply bowed at her compliment. He slowly lowered himself reverently to a knee.
Death itself never dissuaded you from your path to us. The Lord bestows a lantern upon his crown. This is the reason for your sword of flames.
Kale answered as Sir Beric had always wondered why he was chosen for this specific ability.
Sir Beric, I name you the Crown.
Gendry was fairly certain of what his role would be. He turned his hammer over in his hand. Kale approached him after Sir Beric. Lord Gendry struck the ground with his hammerhead and lowered himself to a knee.
Gendry Baratheon, I presume?
Kale inquired to Lord Gendry's quick response.
I am.
You are the creator, the craftsman. All your life you perfected your craft, arming both enemies and allies alike. Now, you arm the living versus the dead for over 10,000 years. My kind has produced dragonglass weapons. Never before we have seen such quantity or quality. The realm is in your debt, but we ask one more task of you, my prince. You will fight. Gendry Baratheon, I name you the Smith.
Kale finished. She now turned her attention to Ser Jorah. He knew there were only 2 deities remaining. Surely his character would warrant the more coveted of the 2. Ser Jorah majestically lowered himself as Kale approached him. His head was already bowed.
Jorah the Andal, ever courageous and strong, continuing to fight for your loved ones, despite being given a death sentence, one by sword, another by disease. Your strength and steel will be tested this night, Ser Jorah.
My steel will be worthy of this title.
Ser Jorah confidently assured her. There was something different in the air as the 2 remaining men were born of the blood of the first men, or what the realm had assumed was the first men.
Jorah the Andal, I name you the warrior.
Kale then reluctantly turned to face Jon. She seemed to have expected some disappointment in him. Her perplexed face slowly met his.
Are you amused?
Jon hadn't realized he was smiling as she approached him.
It's fitting, that's all.
How so?
All my life I've been treated as an outsider, finding my place among thieves and murderers.
One thing has nothing to do with the other. You were chosen by life to represent death, something you know a great deal about.
Kale informed him, and Jon did not know how to respond to this.
You're confused. It's understandable. Those closest to you are not even sure what to call you. Jon or Aegon, Stark, Snow or Targaryen. I agree it is fitting, unfortunately. People are not sure of what you are, partly because you are not sure of whom you are.
Kale finished and Jon was awestruck. It's as if she knew his thoughts. He lowered to a knee and dug the tip of Blackfire into the ground.
Jon Snow, I name you the Stranger.
Finished Kale now that she had assigned all 7 deities. Jon had regained his feet as he felt the cold rush of wind from overhead. Rhaegal had landed in the clearing. Queen Daenerys quickly dismounted and rushed over to Jon. She paid no attention to the dozen or so children of the forest surrounding the great weirwood. Although Rhaegal showed some mild interest, taking in their scent, she was partially out of breath as her words seemed to fail her.
From above.
Queen Daenerys paused to reclaim her breath. Jon allowed her to collect herself as she attempted to start anew.
From above. The tree in the middle. Each of you standing around it. It looks like the spiral, in the caves. I'm not sure if that's important. Also, the dead have stopped marching.
Queen Daenerys continued breathlessly, and Jon attempted to hide his concern.
Those remaining are just standing at the water's edge, facing us.
She finished as Jon rushed out of the clearing. After a few minutes, he eventually reached the shoreline just on the opposite side of Drogon's body. The moon was visible just above the horizon. Jon was expecting the worst, and he saw it. Somehow the Night King and his White Walkers were casually walking over the water that separated the isle from the mainland. The moon caused a silhouette effect as they approached. Jon waited a bit longer. He wanted a count of how many were approaching. The minutes seemed like hours as the snow continued to fall. As Jon had feared, the Night King was on horseback, and 6 walkers were his escort. Jon closed his eyes in reverence. Everything Chaol said was true. He looked at their feet as they drew near. Each step made contact with the water. It instantly froze. They continued as they could surely see Jon now. He turned and started back to the clearing. Halfway down the path, Arya was waiting for him. Jon paused and looked at her. There was concern on her face, but she still had a fierceness about her. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder.
I'm glad you're here.
Where else would I be?
His sister responded with a measured strength.
Bravos, maybe.
Answered Jon with a hollow smile, clearly attempting to mask his apprehension.
What's behind you, Jon?
Inquired Arya, to which Jon responded stoically.
Nothing good. They're here, Arya.
Just as father promised.
Muttered Arya under her breath as Jon tracked through the deep snow and back up to the clearing. She followed Jon, and their solemn look communicated all that the group needed to hear. Ser Jorah exhaled slightly as Ser Jaime and Lady Brienne held each other's hands. Lady Arya then ran over to Lord Gendry as Queen Daenerys stood close to Jon and forced an embrace. Jon then peered over his queen's shoulder to Chaol.
Is Daenerys involved?
Perhaps after.
Responded Chaol, and Jon took Daenerys by the shoulders.
Get on Rhaegal and circle us from overhead.
This is our final stand, then.
Queen Daenerys responded. Jon knew she wanted to be involved, to avenge her children and fight for her kingdoms. The married couple were both aware their last dragon was now neutralized. This trial would be settled the old way, sword to sword. To Jon's surprise, she agreed with him. Queen Daenerys walked along the line of warriors, making eye contact with each as she passed. Perhaps the gods knew what they were doing. The combined force of the North, the Stormlands, the Western Lands and the Crown Lands would now fight united against their common foe, death itself. The same cold rush of wind that brought Daenerys here had now taken her away. Jon watched as she flew into the night.
Will you fight with us?
Our magic is weak, non-existent now. I'm sorry, stranger, but you fight this battle alone.
I'm not alone.
Responded Jon as he eyed his companions.
My heart is full.
Jon cried as he approached the weirwood where he stood in silent vigil. Jon wasn't sure what came over him, but his voice seemed disconnected from the rest of him.
Night has gathered, and now my trial begins.
King Jon whispered softly enough to hear the footsteps of his companions walking towards him.
May it not end until my death.
Followed Ser Jorah, and Jon's surprise was evident.
I shall wear no crowns and win no glory.
Said Gendry, and Jon's heart was now pounding.
I am the sword in the darkness.
Shouted Lady Brienne in an encouraging tone.
I am the fire that burns away the cold.
Exclaimed Ser Beric, and tears now welled in Jon's eyes.
I am the light that brings the dawn.
Sang Jaime. Jon now focused on his sister and the taste of salt on his lips. Jon thought of all they had been through, all she had endured. Jon didn't think he could be any prouder of the woman she had become, until she spoke.
I pledge my life and honor for this night, and all nights to come.
Jon then placed his gloved hand on Arya's shoulder.
We are the shield that guards the realms of men.
Arya cried, and with a boldness she looked at her brother and continued softly.
for the realm.
Arya whispered, and Jon rocked back on his heels and grinned in agreement.
Aye, we are the shields,
responded Jon to more than just his sister. Jon then looked around to the 5 others.
For the realm!
Their king shouted, and in a fluid motion Jon drew Blackfire and turned to face his adversaries. The other 6 stepped in line to Jon's right and left. The isle fell silent, and the wind temporarily ceased. Swordsmen moved about without the snow making a sound. A blinding light struck the 7 and cast long shadows behind them. Jon held up his hand to shield his eyes. The light vanished as quickly as it came. Jon made out the figures approaching. One by one he heard Valyrian steel swords being removed from their sheaths. Jon watched as the Night King dismounted his undead horse. Not unlike Hardhome, Jon watched him slowly raise his arms. Jon presumed he was raising the dead, possibly even Drogon. His heart sank as he realized Rhaegal would once again have to battle his brother. Unexpectedly, a thick fog appeared from behind their foes instead. It rolled over the White Walkers and eventually consumed Jon and his friends. Visibility was near whiteout conditions and the wind filled their ears. Jon made an attempt to step forward and greet their visitors. The days of watching, avoiding, and riding past each other were over. This was the night one of them would end. Jon's daydream was interrupted as he looked down to see a hand upon his chest. Arya had stepped in front of him and halted his advance. "Arya," whispered Jon.
Quiet.
She snapped back at him. Jon trusted her and let her advance slowly upon the walkers. Jon was still wrestling with that decision as he watched. She was 5, maybe 10 paces ahead of the rest when Jon could barely make any sight of her. He saw her quickly collapse to the ground as blue eyes appeared above her. The charging walker tripped over Arya as she sprang upward, removing the ground from beneath him. The walker face-planted into the snow, mere steps in front of Gendry. The young Baratheon brought down his warhammer with a fury. The impact with the back of its skull sent the walker into a shatter. Arya then regained her feet and continued listening for more oncomers. Ser Jorah could barely make out any of the others despite being only feet from them. The misty darkness suddenly illuminated, and it started from behind and rapidly surrounded them. Ser Jorah instantly realized this as dragonfire. Ser Beric lit his sword and placed his back at Ser Jorah's.
She's using the fire to try and condense some of the fog and restore some of our vision.
Ser Jorah said to Ser Beric as the two continuously scanned the trees for their foes.
Smart queen you have there, Ser Jorah.
Claimed Ser Beric, and Ser Jorah then heard King Jon order aloud.
Lady Brienne cover Sir Jaime. Ser Jorah cover Ser Beric. Arya and Gendry with me.
Their king commanded. Ser Jorah and Ser Beric held their swords at the ready. The two slowly ventured to the right of the clearing. They stood in silence other than the occasional grunt or clang of steel. The two knights then reached the edge of the clearing. Ser Jorah peered into the trees that surrounded them. He could see the vivid blue eyes staring back at him from a distance.
There,
observed Ser Jorah simply. Both men advanced into the trees in search of their target. Onward they pushed, Ser Jorah first and Ser Beric a few paces behind. The farther from the clearing they ventured, visibility slightly improved. Out from behind a tree stepped a moderately sized White Walker. His thin ice sword gleamed and reflected the light emitted from a flaming heartsbane. Longclaw was raised at the ready. as Ser Jorah slowly paced towards his foe. Once he was a few paces from his target, Ser Jorah charged. The White Walker maintained his sword at his side. Ser Jorah swung as the walker disappeared into the night. Only light snowflakes remained in his place. Ser Jorah was confused because he knew he did not make contact. Still, the walker disintegrated. In his confusion, he was, once again, plunged into darkness as Ser Beric's sword had been put out. Ser Jorah knew what had happened, even before he turned his back. Once he did, the sudden darkness all made sense. The walker that disappeared had re-emerged behind Ser Beric, its ice sword now protruding out of Ser Beric's chest. Ser Jorah advanced as Ser Beric fell to his knees, gasping for his final breaths. A leap and a downward strike by Ser Jorah was casually cast aside by the White Walker. His blue eyes were now the only source of light in these bleak woods. Volley after volley were blocked as the two were equally matched. Ser Jorah had begun to tire as his last parry drove him back multiple steps. The walker came down again. Ser Jorah held Longclaw horizontally to block the strike. When the walker's blade slid down to Longclaw's hilt and sliced into Jorah's forearm. The back end of the same swing also cut through Jorah's armored thigh. His blood splattered across the snow as he attempted to regain his footing. Painfully, he stumbled forward, leaving bloody footprints behind him in the snow. The walker advanced and continuously delivered blow after blow. Longclaw sang as it blocked each strike, the last of which made Ser Jorah lose his grip from his left hand. Ser Jorah knew he had his chest exposed. He also knew he was not leaving this island alive with his current injuries. The best he could hope for was to take this cold bastard with him. He intentionally left himself exposed as the walker then stabbed him through the belly. His free hand gripped his Valyrian dagger and simultaneously stabbed the walker in the chest. An ominous shriek occurred as the walker disintegrated to the wind, sword and all. Ser Jorah painfully made his way back to the clearing, his weak hand covering the stab wound of his belly. The warrior had hoped to surprisingly intervene in an ongoing duel, and maybe shatter one more of these frigid bastards before his time was up. Sir Jaime and Lady Brienne stood back to back to prevent any surprise attacks. The dragon fire along the perimeter had improved their visibility greatly.
Don't you go dying trying to keep me alive. No way I make it out of here.
You better do the same,
responded Lady Brienne. Her eyes met Sir Jaime's from over her shoulder as he gave her an encouraging grin.
Down!
Shrieked Brienne as blue eyes had emerged directly behind Sir Jaime. Brienne swung so quickly she just managed to nick the walker's throat. It caused just enough disorientation for Sir Jaime to finish him off with a stab to its chest. Widow's Wail had now claimed its first White Walker. Perhaps Eddard Stark was smiling down upon them, Sir Jaime thought to himself. Sir Jaime was amazed at Lady Brienne's blade speed. He righted himself and felt warmth running down his neck. Lady Brienne realized that she had cut Jaime's ear during her swing.
Another down!
Lady Brienne shouted, half concerned her passing of information could give away their position.
That's 2 now,
informed King John from a distance.
3 in total,
shouted a dying Ser Jorah. Shouts and screams were heard as Lady Brienne checked their surroundings and advanced on the odd noises. Sir Jaime pursued her as they ran through the mist and snow. The pair of them could see a body on the ground and 2 walkers standing over him. Ser Jorah had finally succumbed to his injuries. The 2 walkers advanced on the pair of them as they raised their combined swords that had once defended the north as a single blade. Sir Jaime drew the walker in and baited him into a lunge. Lady Brienne was not nearly as patient, taking the fight directly to her adversary. Sir Jaime had remembered Jon's advice about their overswing. Again and again, Sir Jaime sidestepped them, looking for his opportunity to strike. Lady Brienne grunted as their steel clanged over and over. Her swing was blocked before she was squarely kicked in the chest. She stumbled backwards into Sir Jaime as he quickly panicked until he realized it was her. The two walkers continued their advance. Sir Jaime saw worry in Brienne's eyes for the first time. He had already accepted his fate, although she was clearly still concerned over her own. The two set their feet and refused to retreat. Lady Brienne raised Oathkeeper and taunted the oncoming walker, as some peripheral movement distracted her. Lady Arya streaked into view, and one of the walkers swung as she slid in between its legs. Lady Brienne watched Arya pivot, turn, and draw on the second walker still advancing on Lady Brienne. Arya fired her Valyrian steel arrow as the first walker stepped in between them and caught the arrow mid-air. Lady Brienne could see the shock on Arya's face as she turned to draw away one of the walkers. It worked as the one closest gave chase to Arya. Lady Brienne and Sir Jaime were left with the other walker at a close interval. Lady Brienne stood her ground as Sir Jaime attempted to flank his left. As Jaime approached, the walker blocked Brienne's attack and stomped on the top of her bended knee. Sir Jaime could hear the bones in her leg shatter, and yet she refused to acknowledge the pain. Sir Jaime knew the pain must have been severe, as the color was draining from her face. She continued blocking the walker's strikes despite being on one knee. Sir Jaime charged, and the walker likely thought this to be predictable. The walker's sword clanged against Sir Jaime's and sent Widow's Wail tumbling, end over end, into the mist. As Sir Jaime stood disarmed, the walker then turned to Brienne. It swung laterally to remove her head. Sir Jaime leapt onto the walker's back and dug his dagger into its chest. The walker dissipated into shards of ice, and this caused Sir Jaime to collapse to the ground. Moments later, Lady Brienne was painfully helped to her feet. Her left arm hung around Sir Jaime's neck as they headed off in the direction of Sir Jaime's lost sword. The White Walker Arya had distracted was now giving chase. The others she had encountered had not been this agile. Arya had reached the wooded areas and still had not lost him. It finally lost sight of her as she ducked behind one of the many trees offering her cover. The illuminated blue eyes continued searching for her. Arya's heart sank as those same blue eyes set upon its new target. Not her, but a young man carrying a large warhammer. The walker was mere feet from Gendry, as he still had not noticed the threat. The walker raised its thin ice razor as Arya screamed into the fray.
Get down!
Lord Gendry ducked low, but the walker had then disappeared. Arya felt the cold exhale of the walker behind her. The cracking of its 1,000-year-old joints sounded like a creeping glacier. Without turning, Arya sensed his stab attempt and sidestepped. The ice razor made contact with her and impaled her into the tree. Arya struggled and tried to free herself. She looked up at the unforgiving blue eyes that were going to take her life. She struggled against the tree and the razor that held her there. This particular walker seemed to be enjoying her panic. His hesitation cost him dearly as a swinging warhammer separated the two with a crash. It came crashing down on the walker's sword and shattered it. Arya was now free, and Gendry countered his vertical swing with a subsequent horizontal swing that made contact with the walker's chest. He sailed back several feet as Arya leapt and buried Catspaw into its collarbone. The walker disintegrated as Gendry approached Lady Arya, assuming her to be mortally wounded. She was cutting at her smoking leather gambeson with Catspaw. Gendry hurried to her to see the extent of the damage. Alas, she was somehow unhurt. The walker's blade had caught only her clothing, not her abdomen. Gendry was relieved to see her unhurt as she cut away the damaged, burning clothing. Lord Gendry could see her side midriff and the dark red, almost black burn the walker's sword left behind.
Bit of frostbite. Those blades are bloody cold.
She gestured, although Lord Gendry was still silent through this ordeal, just staring at Arya's midsection. Slightly annoyed at him, she beckoned.
Keep your bloody eyes up, Baratheon.
Jon carefully advanced into the oncoming mist. The first walker was just disposed of by Arya and Gendry. Ser Jorah and Ser Beric had ventured off on their own, as did Ser Jaime and Lady Brienne. Minutes passed as Jon had not yet made contact with his adversary. The first sound Jon heard was Lady Brienne shout,
"Another down!"
That makes 2.
Jon responded quickly and without thought. His response gave away his position. No sooner had he spoken before 2 walkers set down upon him. One advanced as the other circled him. Jon was quick to repel any volley. The walker Jon had defeated at Hardhome struck much more fiercely. Jon still felt as if he was being toyed with. This lit a fire in his belly as his strikes and lunges were becoming much more reckless. Jon had presumed the Night King wanted him alive, and this was almost the proof. Jon easily kept these 2 walkers at bay. At the very least, it gave his people a 6-4 advantage elsewhere. Jon's largest concern was the location of the Night King. Jon had yet to see him fight. Only Theon could know the slightest of his abilities. Jon's mind raced as he was almost sparring with these 2 walkers. He continued to block their advances, even forcing retreats at times. Jon's concern was he failed to locate any others in his group. Arya and Gendry were supposed to stay at his flanks. What he heard next made his blood turn cold. A terrified scream he heard. It was a woman's voice, but not Arya's. This distraction was taken advantage of as a square kick to the chest sent Jon hurtling in the other direction. He regained his feet and attempted to locate his targets. The 2 walkers were no longer in sight and Jon hurried off after them. He was unaware of the direction they went until Jon stopped dead in his tracks. Again, as many times before, Jon located their eyes before he saw their flesh. The eyes were too high as Jon assumed him to be on horseback. As the walker approached Jon, he saw there was no horse. This walker was at least 8 feet tall, and his sword matched his height. Jon was going to have to get creative with this fight. Better him than anyone else, Jon thought to himself. The walker circled him completely. He moved well for someone so large. Jon attempted to get a read on him. Jon kept him at a larger distance than his previous fights. The giant walker took a large swing, which Jon easily sidestepped. The sword severed a large tree trunk nearly in half. Cracks and moans were heard as the tree came into contact with those surrounding it. A large crash ensued as the timber fell to the ground. Still, the walker advanced slowly, and Jon gave ground. He was unsure if a blocked strike would even keep him upright. Finally, the walker had exhausted its own patience and came at Jon in a fury. Jon ducked and rolled as he managed to escape more than a few times. The walker struck Blackfire and Jon thought his shoulder had been dislocated. He managed to switch his sword to his left hand just as the walker made contact with him. The pommel of the walker's sword struck Jon squarely in his midsection. Jon tried not to topple over, but he couldn't avoid it. The walker then picked Jon off the ground by his hair and slammed him into the adjacent tree. Blackfire rested by his feet and the walker peeled Jon off the tree. Jon struggled to right himself. The walker then wrapped his arms around Jon and attempted to squeeze the life out of him. Jon, already in a daze, struggled to breathe. The pressure increased and Jon couldn't let out a wail. He felt his ribs pop underneath his armor. The pain was immense, and for a brief moment, Jon wished it all to end. He decided his story would not end this way. His nose was mere inches from the vibrant blue eyes of the giant walker. Jon slammed his forehead into the walker's face. Again and again he struck with the only weapon in his arsenal. A third time Jon struck the walker's face and he was released. Jon crumpled to the ground and felt blood gushing down his face. Jon finally got a breath into his lungs and then a second breath. He remained on his hands and knees as he watched the blood gush onto the snow a few inches from his face. Jon pushed himself to his knees as he grasped Blackfire. He tried to use the sword to push himself to his feet. That's when all his senses had dulled. He felt nothing, not the cold of the snow nor the warmth of his own blood running down his face. He heard nothing, not wind, not friend nor foe. His vision had dulled to a blur. Jon knew the Night King was near him. Once again, Jon did not know why he was still alive. He was at the base of the weirwood tree, in the same clearing he had first been told the truth. He gazed upon the weirwood and prayed to his father for help. As he expected, the Night King had approached him from behind and walked around to face Jon. The Night King's face was normally devoid of all emotion, but Jon swore he saw a glimmer of excitement, even triumph in his eyes. The last thing Jon expected to see in his hand was a dragonglass shard. Jon's mind raced at what this could mean. Why he had lived to this moment finally all made sense. Jon had just wished his friends and family didn't have to die as well. Jon was sure he was the last one left. The Night King and his 8-foot walker remained. Jon was raised to his feet and slammed into the trunk of the center weirwood. The tall walker grasped his wrists from behind the tree and immobilized Jon. His breaths were short and shallow. The pain of his ribs was beyond words. The Night King approached him, dagger in hand. The foes met eyes, as Jon heard a stretching noise. Only one thing in this world made that noise. Jon, still in a daze, then lifted his head and smiled at the Night King as he spoke.
Ro Shumba.
He whispered just loud enough for the two of them to hear. A slight head tilt was all of the Night King's response, revealing his intrigue at the very least. A sharp snap followed, and Jon knew an arrow had taken flight. The vivid sound of glass shattering followed as Jon was released from the tree. The instant Jon's arms were loose, Gendry's warhammer struck the Night King in the back. He fell forward a few steps, and Gendry looked down at his hammer. The shaft bent to an unusable angle. The Night King dropped both his scythe and dragonglass. He turned to Gendry as the smith swung again with his damaged weapon. The Night King caught the head of the hammer and squarely kicked Gendry in the chest. Lord Gendry flew several paces through the air. His back stopped his fall on a nearby tree, and he crumpled onto the snow without making the slightest of sounds. The Night King retrieved his scythe, just as Lady Brienne came down hard with Oathkeeper. Her mobility was severely limited due to her broken leg. The Night King slashed and spun like nothing Jon had ever seen. Jon still lay on his chest, struggling to breathe. Jon had no choice but to watch as the Night King would cut down anyone who remained. He sliced Brienne's leg to the bone, and then weak sidearm just before taking blood from her torso. He was removing her, a single piece at a time. Jon felt helpless as he crawled towards Blackfire. Jon's heart ached as Brienne fell to a knee. Jon shifted his head over to where Gendry lay immobilized. His body had not moved since his back had struck the tree. Jon couldn't imagine this could be any worse, until a bow dropped a few feet from his face. Arya had streaked by him, not noticing Jon was still alive. He called out to her, but his voice made no sound. Jon wept as he saw his sister sprint towards her own death. The Night King's scythe rested on Brienne's shoulder. He was about to remove her head from her body when Arya leapt towards him. Jon recognized Arya raise Longclaw over her head as she made a last-ditch effort to save her loved ones. The Night King caught her mid-air and strangled her for a few moments. He slammed her body into Brienne's as the two toppled over. Jon screamed, "Enough!" but his voice was merely a whisper. Sir Jaime assisted Lady Brienne back into the clearing. After a few moments, Sir Jaime steadied Brienne and bent over to reclaim his Valyrian steel.
You fought well.
Complimented Lady Brienne while attempting to hide a deep grimace.
It's not over yet.
Responded Sir Jaime while breathing heavily.
Can you walk, my lady?
If I have to.
We're nearly there.
Encouraged Sir Jaime as he again assisted her weight.
Found your sword, I see.
I did. But my dagger must have disintegrated with that walker. A secondary weapon is wasted on a cripple anyway.
Lady Brienne had no retort for this. The center weirwood was now in sight, and Sir Jaime steadied Lady Brienne in place.
I'm going to check the perimeter. Are you defensible?
Quite. Thank you, Sir Jaime.
Breathed an exhausted Lady Brienne. Sir Jaime then retreated to the tree line. He slowly made his way, checking both woods and the clearing. While still searching, Sir Jaime then paused. He craned his neck to get a better vantage point. The tip of an arrow protruded out from behind a tree. Sir Jaime knew the archer was aware of his presence. A subtle shh was heard from behind that same tree. Sir Jaime silently twisted himself to spot the target. Through the fog, mist and snow, Sir Jaime could see a large walker near the center weirwood. The arrow then flew and struck the walker squarely in the back. Sir Jaime noted the similar shriek and explosion of ice. He turned to congratulate the archer, but Lady Arya sprinted from the tree line, paying him little attention. Sir Jaime then gave chase as he lost sight of her in the thick mist. Sir Jaime now knew he was past the weirwood, and he proceeded with caution as he gripped Widow's Wail tightly. What Sir Jaime saw next, he wasn't prepared for. The Night King himself held Arya Stark by her neck. He used her as a weapon and knocked Lady Brienne to the ground using Arya's limp body. Sir Jaime was conflicted between rushing into this fight and maintaining his stealth as he approached. The Night King bent at the waist and retrieved Lady Arya's dagger from her belt. He examined Catspaw closely and shifted his attention back towards Arya. He raised Catspaw above his head as Brienne wrapped her arms around Arya. She rolled her body over Arya's as the Night King thrusted the blade into the side of Brienne's ribcage. Lady Brienne made no sound as Sir Jaime could see the Night King twisting the knife that rested between her ribs. Finally, Sir Jaime found himself within striking distance and attempted a slash with Widow's Wail to separate the Night King from his own arm. The Night King bent backwards to avoid the slash as he released his grip on Catspaw, the hilt still stuck in Brienne's ribcage. In a fluid motion, Jaime transitioned to a vertical slash. The Night King then caught Sir Jaime's blade with his bare hand. The two struggled for control of the single blade. Sir Jaime's single hand made it difficult to control the blade. It seemed the Night King was toying with him. The Night King pushed the pommel to Sir Jaime's breastplate and forced him to a single knee. Any two-handed soldier would now try a secondary attack, but Jaime knew this was impossible for a one-handed man. Sir Jaime looked to Brienne laying at his feet, still covering Arya's body. Brienne knew what was about to happen. She simply nodded to him, seemingly encouraging him to take the drastic action that was on his mind. Lady Brienne's words stuck in her throat as Sir Jaime immediately understood her permission and her goodbye. Sir Jaime released the grip of his Valyrian steel sword, to which the Night King turned and buried into Jaime Lannister's chest. Lady Brienne then shrieked, as did the Night King. The Night King stumbled as his legs turned to shards. He looked down to see the Catspaw's hilt protruding from his chest, and a smile on the dying Lannister's face. The Night King disintegrated to the wind as Sir Jaime collapsed onto the snow. Arya painfully righted herself to find the Catspaw dagger perched atop a pile of ice shards. Arya stared at the blade, which was aflame, similar to that of Sir Beric's sword. Lady Brienne crawled to Sir Jaime and pulled him to her. Lady Arya regained her feet and saw a massive pool of blood underneath Brienne and Sir Jaime. Both were bleeding profusely as Gendry and Jon had finally uprighted themselves. Arya noticed Jon's hand on her shoulder as he approached Sir Jaime. Gendry embraced Arya and she helped him over to Brienne and Jaime. Brienne silently wept over Sir Jaime as his breaths drew short. Jon then knelt at Sir Jaime's side.
You saved my sister, my blood, and her sworn sword, Sir Jaime. Your debt to my family is paid in full.
King Jon finished ceremoniously. Sir Jaime let out a slight grunt, acknowledging King John's gratitude as he silently exhaled the remaining air from his lungs.
No, not Sir Jaime, the Night Kingslayer.
Corrected Lady Brienne ceremoniously, and these were the last words Jaime Lannister ever heard.
How do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm still the woman I go.
Queen Daenerys landed Rhaegal in the clearing and hurried over to the weirwood and the exhausted warriors beneath it.
It's over.
Informed Jon with a weak breath as he embraced her. Daenerys kissed him in exuberance. She took in her surroundings as she saw Longclaw on the ground, but not its owner. Jon stood beside her with mild difficulty.
Sir Jorah. He fought bravely, my queen.
Jon informed her. Queen Daenerys quickly composed herself and rose to her feet with all the poise she could muster.
Who all did we lose?
Sir Beric, Sir Jorah, and Sir Jaime.
Lady Brienne as well, minutes after Sir Jaime.
Lady Arya corrected with a certain reluctance.
Please take me to Sir Jorah.
Ordered Queen Daenerys, and Jon agreed as he retrieved Longclaw from the snow. The couple then proceeded to the other side of the weirwood. Jon gently rolled Sir Jorah onto his back and placed Longclaw upon his chest. Jon gave his queen some space as she silently mourned her friends. Jon thought of all of her losses, her family, Grey Worm, Sir Jorah, and 2 of her dragons. After a few minutes passed, Queen Daenerys rose and slowly approached Jon.
Would you lay him beside his brothers?
A funeral pyre.
Jon inquired, and Queen Daenerys refused to become over-emotional. She simply responded to Jon without eye contact.
At dawn?
The sun will be up within the hour.
I'll see you at dawn then, my king.
She departed the clearing, and after numerous minutes she arrived at the shore again. She passed Drogon's body and was near the ice bridge where the White Walkers had initially crossed the God's Eye. The 2 direwolves had used the narrow bridge and had made their way onto the island. Queen Daenerys paid them little attention and admired the frozen bridge. She followed it with her eyes to where it reached the mainland. What she saw there made her heart stop. Queen Daenerys swiftly left the beach and sprinted across the clearing. She found Jon and leapt into his arms. Jon grimaced as his ribs remained shattered. She sputtered. Lady Arya was helping arrange the bodies when Daenerys garnered her attention.
They're still...
She was clearly panicked as Jon attempted to calm her.
What is it?
The dead. They're still marching south.
Screamed Daenerys, and Jon's blood ran cold. Lady Arya ran out of the clearing as Gendry and Jon shared looks of concern. The children of the forest were emerging after the fight, and Jon sought out Kael.
How could this be?
The gods have made their will known.
Responded Kael, and Jon was impatient as he addressed her.
Why are they still marching south?
No one has told them to stop.
She simply retorted, and Jon was starting to put it all together.
His dragonglass dagger, and all the times he refused to fight me.
Jon spoke aloud to himself. Kael seemed to be letting him work it out on his own.
He was immune to both fire and ice. Must he be replaced?
The Lord of Light once spoke through the crone. To you, death always wins, and we still have to fight him.
Informed Cale while quoting Sir Beric. Queen Daenerys took Jon's arm as she looked to Jon for his explanation. Jon still seemed to be working it out.
That's why the Night King in the Dragonstone Cave looked different.
Jon asked as he coughed violently and seemed to be in misery. Multiple broken ribs nearly took him to the ground.
They weren't the same person, were they?
No, they weren't. This is why we created the Three-Eyed Raven. The first men ended the long night with an agreement that the Night King would be relieved of his duties if they won the trial. A person of both fire and ice would take his place and ferry the dead onward.
Cale finished, almost ashamed to admit the sorrowful truth they would have to soon face.
What does that have to do with Bran?
Asked Arya, and Cale bowed her head almost in shame.
You are familiar with the phrase, "The North remembers,"
inquired Cale as she stared at the pile of bodies under the weirwood.
Of course.
Stated Arya, obviously anxious to hear her answer.
A slight amendment, I would add. The North must remember.
But we failed to, didn't we?
Yes, my stranger. The Three-Eyed Raven was tasked with keeping the realms of men informed. The Night King was supposed to survive the trial, even if they lost, and recall his army.
So what happens now?
He must be replaced, and the army recalled, someone of both fire and ice.
Cale finished. Me, whispered Jon as Queen Daenerys protested, as did Lady Arya.
Some say your birth was the reason for the walkers stirring in the first place.
We better get on with it then.
I'm sorry, my stranger, but the Lord of Light no longer possesses the power to create a new Night King. Power is a pendulum, weighing heavily on Death's side at the moment. You would be the obvious choice, Jon Snow. Another is required.
She admitted. Arya looked at Gendry, as did Jon and Daenerys. Cale refused to reveal what was required, until one of them spoke up.
Me?
Admitted Queen Daenerys to the dismay of all the others on the Isle.
No, it cannot be.
Jon screamed, nearly unsheathing his sword. Two children took Queen Daenerys' hands and led her to the weirwood. Jon panicked and refused to let them take her.
You are not of fire and ice, only fire.
Jon cried as Queen Daenerys stood in front of the great weirwood, head bowed, almost looking ashamed.
But I am, Jon.
Queen Daenerys revealed without eye contact.
How so?
Jon asked defiantly, and Queen Daenerys paused to collect herself.
I am with your child, Jon. I carry a little Stark inside me. Your blood is now my blood.
Informed Queen Daenerys, slowly raising her head to meet Jon's eye. Arya buried her face in Gendry's chest, and Jon nearly lost his balance and leaned forward to embrace her.
I'm so sorry, Dany.
He admitted to her in a voice slightly above a whisper.
I'm not. This was my destiny, my love. I was always meant to save Westeros, and to rule. I will still accomplish both.
Queen Daenerys admitted before Jon turned to Cale.
If your lord cannot transform me, how can she?
One of the Lord's last acts was to raise the stranger. His power lives within you. He ensured his power would live on, even if he was powerless.
Cale admitted. She looked ashamed as she revealed a shard of dragon glass. Jon wept and refused it. Queen Daenerys took his attention and pleaded.
This is how life goes on.
She said as her cheek pressed up against his breastplate.
You must.
Queen Daenerys pleaded simply as she placed the dragon glass in his hand. Daenerys broke the embrace and was led over to the weirwood. Children stood at both of her sides as she leaned her back against the wide trunk. Jon stared at the weapon in his hand. He was beyond conflicted.
What words? Any words that must be spoken?
No, my stranger. Only death pays for life.
Cale informed him. Queen Daenerys stared at her, confirming what she knew all along. This is the way it was meant to be. Daenerys' regret was that she again would be separated from the ones she loved.
Can this ever be reversed?
Only when the seas run dry. and the mountains blow in the wind.
Cale paused, which allowed for Daenerys to interrupt.
And when the sun rises in the west,
Sang Daenerys. She lifted her chin and faced her king. Jon closed his eyes and again whispered what sounded to be a song. He opened his own and stared into hers. The moment he prolonged. He wanted this burned into his memory.
I love you so.
Jon cried, and with a devout fierceness Daenerys replied,
and we love you.
Jon wailed and drove the chard into her heart. Her screams pierced Jon's very soul. As he continued to drive in the shard, he felt the warm trickle of blood. He looked to her wound. Surprisingly, she had not bled. Jon realized it was his own blood. The scars on his chest had reopened and his blood was running down to his legs. Jon collapsed but did not lose sight of Daenerys. Her eyes blazed a brilliant blue. Moans and cracks of splitting ice filled all their ears. Daenerys' screams are what made these sounds. The moment she paused, a blinding light enveloped the isle. Arya and Gendry were knocked from their feet. Jon was now laying on his side. His vision blurred as he faded from consciousness, watching as Daenerys' feet approached him. And then all went black.